Mark Seifter.
And I'm Lydia Zayas Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Arcane Mark. Today, we're talking about adjusting a setting, whether that's a pre-published setting that you're adjusting for your group, or kind of your own setting that you're adjusting from the baseline assumptions of the game. In fact, those are the two sort of separate halves of this episode that we're going to cover. So, I think I was talking to Linda before the episode, and we'll talk about adjusting settings that do not like mess around with the mechanical assumptions of the game first, and then go into ones that are a little more involved and use more mechanical adjustments. So the first way that you might get into adjusting a setting is, okay, I've got a pre-published setting, but there's something about it that I want to change because for my group, for the story I want to tell, I want to adjust something that's in the setting.
Yeah, like for example, you might like the country, you might like the nations and the geography and other things like that, but you might want to introduce your own pantheon of deities into that setting.
That's right. Absolutely. You could change the deities to a different kind of deity pantheon. Like when I was playing Shackled City, the GM adjusted the pantheon because our group wasn't really fond of the Greyhawk pantheon, and so added in a few deities from several different pantheons, including some from the Forgotten Realms or other D&D settings. So that is one way you can adjust a setting. That's typically not a big change to do unless the deities have a major impact on the storyline.
Or unless there's like a difference in the way that, divine magic fundamentally works. Like if you go from a setting that's built polytheistically to like a monotheistic system or vice versa, then you might have some greater changes there. Another one that you'll often see is like, let's say that you have a setting and it's got all these countries and things like that, and you're like, yeah, I'm not so enthusiastic about this one nation that's right here, so I'm going to come up with my own homebrew nation and stick it in that spot. And so then you'd be thinking about, what are the impacts geopolitically of how does that nation interact with its neighbors, and then how does removing that nation change the power balance and the balance of trade and things like that.
That's right. Another small scale change that many groups like to do when with a setting is if you have a group and you play multiple adventure paths or adventures in a published setting, is to create your own sort of Marvel Cinematic Universe of it, where what your groups have done are maintained and their characters and choices are maintained in future situations. So especially if it's an adventure that takes place in the same country or area as before, then be like, oh yeah, everybody is talking about that PC from the other adventure, or you can see the tavern that was built by this PC in the last AP because you go back to that town.
Or even like, I know the players had some fun talking about like having their characters expound on their opinions of the nation that the PCs in Kingmaker founded and what their current characters thought of their past PCs and their shenanigans.
That's right. So just when you do that, think about the implications of what the PCs have done before, but you want to make sure that it stays as more of a fun homage or reference to maybe with cameos, kind of like the Marvel Cinematic Universe does sometimes, like accepting the times that everybody comes together into the big ones. But you don't want a situation where it's like, well, but our PCs from the previous adventure path are around, so they should just handle all these adventures, and we don't even need to go on this adventure anymore.
And whatever you did at the end of the previous adventure can help inform the reasons why they don't do that, because presumably when you were wrapping up that past adventure, you had a conclusion type thing where you figured out, okay, yeah, so what are your PCs going to do after adventuring? And if they didn't, you can ask the players who are still around, hey, what kinds of goals would they be pursuing? People who just finished this epic fight at the end of an adventure path might want to go, focus on, go back and spend some time with family, or found a magic school, or go traveling the world, or do any number of other things. So, having explanations or they may, as high level characters, have a lot of different pulls on their time, so they can't exactly go swoop in whenever like a second level character has a problem.
Yes, another reason you might want to adjust a setting is because you have something that you or your players just have an issue with in the setting. For
Mhm.
example, if you have a player that anytime a naughty are mentioned is going to have to like leave the room
Mhm.
for like a half an hour and then come back, maybe you can remove a naughty from your setting and replace them with a cockroach or some other thing instead of a spider version.
Mhm.
That player likes better than spiders or can handle better than spiders.
Yeah. Or another one that you'll see sometimes is like, folks who aren't just interested in like certain guns or technology or certain other things that you might see concentrated in certain regions of settings, and they might just decide, okay, yeah, we're gonna remove that kind of stuff
Or
from
they might add
that.
more.
Or they might like it and they might be like, hey, we want this to be more broad spread. We don't want this to be just isolated to this one part of the world.
That's right. And there's also just themes that your players or you might agree together that you want to remove or add more of.
Yeah.
Like, just because of the fact that there's a Pathfinder baseline does not mean that you can have a baseline that's more extreme or less extreme than that
Hmm.
baseline. It's to set a standard so that everyone knows what to expect if you don't have a conversation. And so if your group is like, yeah, we want to be even lighter than that and
Hmm.
have like no blood, so all the ones with persistent bleed damage we're gonna cut out from the setting,
Hmm.
other things like that, you could. Or if you want to have one that's super grim dark, which is
Hmm.
like not always my cup of tea, but it might
Some
be what
people,
exactly
some
what
people
your
may
group
want to
wants
do
to
that.
do.
Yeah, if
Like
everyone
the
in the group
grimmestest,
agrees.
darkestest setting with all of the kind of stuff that the Pathfinder baseline says is usually not included. If everyone in your group agrees, that's
Hmm.
one way you can adjust the setting.
Yeah, another adjustment that can be made to the setting is where you are on the timeline of the setting.
You
If you're
could be 50 million years in the future of the setting.
Yeah, I mean the farther you go off, the
During that time, they might like replace Taldor with a democracy by 50 million years from the current time, based on the general timeline of Golarion and how
Mhm.
quickly things happen.
Yeah, because like if you're setting things in the past, then you may with an established setting, you may have more information. You may be like, yeah, I want to do something that was 100 years in the past, around the death of Eridan, and exploring those kinds of things, and pick up what you know about and then you'll be picking up what you know from the published campaign setting and using what you want, and then adding your own things. And if you're in the future, then there's more like, okay, but how would these sorts of things evolve?
Yep. You could also set a campaign that is before the beginning of time or after the end of time.
That could be, Chrono Trigger style at the end of
There
time.
you go.
Yeah.
It could be in the end of
If
time,
you want
and
to be in
everyone's
the
just
end of time.
hanging out, and you've built a tavern in the end of time, and there are all these like time portals that lead
Hmm.
there that you can't go through, but people come from all time periods to your tavern, and
Hmm.
you have to like talk to them and hear like listen to their problems and like offer them drinks and on food and other things, and that influences the timeline as they all go back to their own time periods.
Hmm. What an
There you
oddly
go.
specific example.
What do you mean? I was just trying to think of a campaign
Hmm.
that would take place at the end of time. I think that you
Yeah,
could
there
do
you
it.
go. Uh,
And that would be altering and adjusting the setting because you're like changing history in various different ways with your tavern.
hmm But even just setting things at a slightly different date can make a huge difference.
Hmm. Like, if, for example, if the campaign is supposed to start on an oath day, but you start the campaign on a moon day instead, imagine what that would mean.
Well, I think that we got a lot of mileage out of that in our Changeling campaign setting, which has real world events being part of it because it's a modern fantasy type thing by setting the campaign several years in the past. So then the campaign is still going to be in the past in the modern day, and then Mark has real world events to be able to work and build
Yeah, it
off
was
of.
set starting in like 2014 or so,
Yeah.
but we were playing it in like starting in like 2018 or
Oh yeah.
2019.
And that way, since it always stays behind you, you know where
Hey,
things are
it's
going to evolve.
Trippy. Hi.
Hmm. And that can be interesting too for players if they know, like, where the setting, by default, might be going to head, and then do they but their characters don't necessarily know, so they can kind of watch and see how those developments arise. Or maybe there's an aspect of the setting that you and your players want to be involved in having happen in a different way. Like you're like, well, we like there was this this conflict, and like canonically it ended this way, but we would prefer to have it end this way, so let's like have our characters be the reason why things happen in a different way.
Yeah, exactly. If you just see something and you're like, this doesn't really seem to make any sense, let's do it this other way, or we just don't like the way that was portrayed, let's do it this other way. So
or like you're looking for a place to put it in like a particular story.
Yeah.
And you think that would be a good opportunity.
Absolutely. And be like, this almost works, but we kind of have to fudge this one thing in the setting. Shall we do that? And
particularly if you're combining things in together from like different adventures, different settings. You're wanting to take something that you had, in a previous game that you were playing, and maybe in a different game system, and bring that concept forward, as we talked about in like our adjusting.
It's usually pretty simple. Like, for example, in the Jewel of the Indigo Isles adventure path, it's on an island chain, so you can kind of put it in any setting. Now, it does have references to religions from Alucard. That's more or less the only thing that you would have to adjust in the setting of the adventure to fit it into, like, more or less any fantasy setting that has the baseline Pathfinder 2 expectations.
Yeah.
There's also, I think, like, one gunslinger in there. So if you don't have guns, you could, like, take them out, and then you change the religions to religions that are more common in your setting than the ones that are mentioned there, which is, like, there's only a few places that you have to worry about that. And then that's it. So typically, this is not, like, a lengthy or arduous process. The major point is figuring out what you want to change and why. Just like when we're building something in a workshop, and getting the concept is the main thing. So when you know that you want to make a change of these kinds of not less mechanical changes, they are simpler to make. Just, you should be able to feel confident you can do that, adjust it, talk to your group, or if it's like a secret thing that they're not supposed to know, don't talk to your group, but know your group before you like change a secret thing that they might not like. And
also like and also like if you are adjusting a setting and it's things that the characters should know about, and so it's like, this is going to be Golarion, except I'm going to replace Irsen with some other northern country idea that the snow wonderland country that inspires me. Then like make sure that the players know when you're departing from what they might assume would be a set of expectations.
Before they make someone from the realm of the Mammoth Lords who hates witches because of the White Witches of Irsen kidnap their family and turn them into bones in their road. It looks like Aquatic Demon just finished playing the beginner box with their daughter, and have been playing for over 16 years. It was one of the most amazing experiences they ever had. That's awesome. Yeah, you could absolutely post it on the Discord somewhere. Maybe Our Adventures is, I think, one that you post about your adventure experiences.
Yeah.
Is that right? I think it's called Our Adventures, and it's in it's in gaming. So yeah,
we totally have a channel.
We love seeing people's happy experiences with playing stuff.
Please tell us about it. We'll read it after the show.
So
speaking of the Discord, tiny.cc/arcademark.
It is at tiny.cc/arcademark. I'll put the link in chat.
Is the link to join.
Boom! Alright, so let's move on to the slightly more challenging setting adjusting, where you actually are monkeying around with the mechanics of the game, or the mechanics or expectations of the game sort of are defining some defaults about the setting that you don't want to keep. This is where you're like, no, I'm not even playing in Golarion, maybe. I'm making my own setting. Or maybe you are playing in Golarion or Alucard, but you're like, this thing that's in the mechanics of Pathfinder is not something that is true in my setting.
Like,
for instance, my setting maybe has no deities.
Yes.
What are you going to do? You have to make some decisions. Are you going to remove the Cleric and Champion class? Are you going to have them work without deities, and do you have some replacement for deities that gets the same injection of rules into
that
those
gives you the divine
characters?
magic and things like that? Is there
And then
like
also
a different
has
source?
spells, skills,
Mm-hmm.
domains, like things that you can pick that will
Mm-hmm.
get those of favored weapons that will get those things over to the closet that
Or
need them.
perhaps, or perhaps they, the deities exist, but they interact with the world in a different way. Like the first game that I played in, where it was like, yeah, well, if you want to access the power of the gods, and you're not like you need to be near like one of these sacred items that allows you to cast spells. And there's one
that setting was very, very adjusted. So
Yeah.
this is one of my homebrew settings. So first of all, the deities kind of had a pact that they weren't going to interfere with the mortal world except for in certain ways, and that they would never interfere with unborn souls, because they all could have interfered with unborn souls, and messing around with those is something that they all realized would be bad news, because the other ones could do something they really didn't like. And so they like forged a compact, and they just cannot leave the realm of the immortals where they live. Other people usually can't get there except for by becoming a god, but no one can ever leave.
Yes.
And additionally to that, there were these basically fonts of divine energy that were required to re-prepare divine spells. You could cast them wherever you wanted to, but if you're not near these generally immobile, though some very powerful sacred relics that were like highly prized. That's why Linda and one of the other characters tried to steal one of the most famous ones. You could bring with you and use to prepare your spells. Now, in addition to that, there were some other types of magic, but humans, which were by far the most common ancestry in the setting, one of the only ancestries that was generally around, could not actually innately cast pretty much any of the other types of magic that existed. Arcane magic was something that elves and certain other ancestry that you could not play in the setting because the humans killed all of them could cast. However, humans were at one point made a pact with devils to create an arcane-esque type of magic that was entirely based on diabolism and demonology and the lower planes. And that is what basically the only type of magic that's available other than divine magic, that you have to go to these points if you want to restore it. You can make a pact with fiends.
Yeah.
And that was pretty much what was around. There were also bards, but they were actually divine bards using a divine bard variant. And that's a pretty significant adjustment to the default setting. Now, it did also have psionics in the setting, which, it was a D&D setting. D&D settings can sometimes have psionics. It was without psionics magic transparency, but also multiple other adjustments I made to make that work out. And yeah, it really changed a lot about the feel of the setting.
Yeah. And, being a cleric there, like that relic that actually let me re-prepare my spells is very precious that we had.
I mean, you didn't have it for very long.
I know, but when we did have it,
you stole it for like a session, and then it was stolen by the bard, and then after that it was.
But Nadia had the other one that we used sometimes too.
You did have that minor one
that let me re-prepare the lower level spells and stuff. Yeah, but it definitely like created.
But you stole one of like the most major ones.
Yeah.
From a large settlement that then the bard stole from you, and there's this whole thing about it.
Yes. Yeah, it definitely is like a very different feel. So like, it was important that I, as the player of the cleric, knew going in that was going to be part of the expectations of how things were going to work in that
That's
setting.
Right. But so that's an example where I adjusted things a lot mechanically from the D&D 3.5 assumed setting. You can make smaller adjustments than that you still might have to figure things out. In some cases, Pathfinder 2e books have some examples of things that can help you out with that. For example, a super high magic campaign could use pervasive magic or some of the rules from Secrets of Magic, whereas a lower magic campaign could use the automatic bonus progression or the your blacksmith is high quality and therefore it has item bonuses variant from the both from the Game Master Guide.
Or you might say for example, take some of the functions that are some of the functions that are in Magic that you really want and fold them into more alchemical theme or flavor.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you say like, there's not necessarily magic here, but there's like certain types of like special alchemy that can do some of these other features that you wouldn't otherwise.
For sure. And Aquatic Demon gives an example of this. Of there was a very undead heavy setting, and they thought that was done a lot, which it has been. So they changed it to more of animated statues, golems, and construct building that in the same places where undead would have been used, because it's a little bit less overdone.
Yeah, and that's gonna keep like the same thematics of like, mindless versus non-mindless for encounters and things like that.
But and also just like the economy of the setting of like, oh well, we have all these mindless creatures that are doing things, and it would have the same implications.
It has the same implications, but it will change things like, you're not going to be using positive energy against them. You're going to be using other things. So
it would also have certain moral implications that were adjusted unless you use people's bodies to build the golems, because it's like selling the bodies of your deceased relatives or something like that to become undead, or making contracts where they the necromancers pay for your funeral and your family after you're dead because you've been raised as an undead, or some other things
so
like
you don't have those kinds of things in there anymore necessarily.
So it does have some changes, but also a lot of the overarching sweeps of it would be pretty similar. So ultimately, you can make almost any mechanical adjustment. I mean, the one I said for 3.5 was huge. That was big. Magic was very important in 3.5, and having it be that restricted was a major adjustment.
Yeah, and if you have something like, access to I said access because, one of the ways you can do this is through rarity of elements. If you take something that's common and it doesn't exist, it's a really different feel versus taking something that's common and making it uncommon. Maybe the PCs have it and some people have it, but not everybody has it. Or making it rare and then it's like, oh my god.
Or making it unique.
Yeah.
Something that's uncommon and making it unique. Be like, yes, Resurrect exists. There's one, powerful oracle of the goddess of death, who is the only person in the world who is allowed to bring someone back from the dead after consulting with the goddess of death.
Yes.
That has a very different feel than when it's even uncommon. Be like, oh wow, okay, this is like serious business.
So if a PC dies, there's going to be a major quest to go there and figure things out. And then maybe there's like trials that you have to go through to prove your worth.
Right. And you could have a setting where just all teleportation effects, even not the teleport itself for the long range, all of them are uncommon. And it's just like, it's really hard to do teleportation effects in this setting. There's not a lot of teleporting.
Or if you had one where that kind of stuff was common, that has major implications on things, major implications on trade, on, military applications, on like security, on all sorts of things.
That's right. So basically, we have a whole episode about rarity, but it's not about setting changes from the rarity, but it's more about how to use a rarity to, like, as your GM, to like figure things out for your game mechanically. But rarity is one of the ways that a setting can be adjusted, and has a lot of implications that many settings just don't get into. Even when they didn't have rarity, it would just be like, there's no explanation for what happens, even despite the fact that this spell exists, which probably, like, replaces giant sectors of the economy. Because it's like, this does 200,000 people's jobs in one day if this wizard casts this spell a few times.
Yeah.
What does this mean? Well, we're just not going to pay attention to it.
But rarity does make it a lot easier to explore that sort of thing. And there's quite a few spells that are in the uncommon category because of, if this were widespread, that has implications for the world. So it's not widespread, but your PCs can get it.
That's right. So think about the way that the setting will be adjusted with the changes you make to the mechanics, and vice versa. Think about the changes to the mechanics that will allow you to express the differences in the setting that you are hoping to show. Think of the themes, the concept what are you trying to show people with your new setting or with your adjusted setting?
Yeah, what are the things that people in your setting are going to care about more or not care about? Like in this example of where you're going to have a lot more animated statues and golems, I can definitely see more like spells and weaponry and things like that are focused around dealing with constructs, because those are a much more prevalent part of life.
Yeah, that's right. So
Whereas you're not gonna, where there's people aren't gonna bother with things that are like against undead because you don't have them.
yeah, they might have a new cantrip that's like disrupt construct.
Yeah.
Instead of disrupt undead.
It's like, this disrupts the magic that powers magical arcane constructs and yada yada yada.
Yep. And there might be more spells that are focused around seizing control of somebody else's construct.
I wanna talk about what the last thing Aquatic Demon said here. In the campaign they're playing, and a certain necromancer is taking souls and mongering them, and their PC died, so the GM had a deity make a deal to bring him back. The deal is that he gets one resurrect, but teleporting is now also harder. That's another thing you can definitely play around with, is the price or the cost of things.
Yes.
Is there that kind of is it, price and cost in terms of like literal gold pieces or whatever money equivalent you have in your game, and also price and cost in terms of metaphysical trades that can make things feel a lot more a lot different, in a campaign where, oh yeah, resurrection is easier and cheaper to come by, then it's you come back much more quickly, whereas with that kind of thing where there's a major trade-off.
That's
or
right.
like maybe when maybe using certain effects might shave time off of your character's lifespan, or like have other consequences, or maybe there's a chance of things going awry.
It all depends on what themes you want to tell with your story, right? As opposed to like the clean, almost clinical magic of most D&D and Pathfinder settings, where it's just like, this magic will do the thing that I want it to do when I cast it. Or you could have a setting where the theme is all magic comes at a price. And in that case, you would be more likely to add these sort of weird bargains and other drawbacks or things like that are happening.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think about there too is like how a lot of times healing magic is, we've talked about this a little bit in past episodes too, where it's like, oh, if you have healing magic around, you're not gonna have any scars or any sustained injuries or things like that, but you can definitely alter that to be like, okay, yeah, if you are, things do leave scars, things can leave sustained injuries, and it depends upon the source.
That's right. So you can definitely change things up to even in the flavor text of mechanical elements in order to make a big difference in terms of what it feels like.
Yeah, like what is the source of that healing magic that you're getting? What is the experience of being healed like, Is it something that, oh yeah, if I got healed a lot, this is drawing from my body's internal vitality, so I'm going to be tired out after doing this, so there's some limitation.
That's right. Or maybe the source of the healing energy is like the power of the upper planes, and so therefore like the heavens are weakened by people using too much healing. And there might be like an evil villainous organization that is like going around healing everybody and constantly, and like create like a giant healing reactor that stores healing energy that's just drawing energy out of the heavens to weaken the heavens or something like that.
Oh yeah, and another idea here, like pockets of magical energy, where certain types of schools of magic are either maximized or minimized.
Yeah, that's definitely something like pervasive magic or ley lines, or some of those other rules from Secrets of Magic will help you out there, where you can get special effects, or certain types of magic are going to work differently or better in certain areas. So like that's definitely something you can add to the setting, and in Pathfinder there's actually rules to help you with that if you want to add it. They can also add things where like monsters in that area are more likely to have automatic spells of that type, the type that is bolstered in the area.
Yeah, or you have like, hazards or other upsurgings or other things to represent upsurgings of magic.
That's right. So I think we covered a bit about both types of setting adjusting that we wanted to at the beginning of the episode. Are there any other questions? This is one we got through pretty efficiently, I think, for the most part.
Or like the idea of a plane of Mechanist where the effect is all damage is always average. You don't even roll dice.
Yeah, then there are planar adjustments in the Game Mastery Guide for Pathfinder 2nd Edition as well, where like certain effects work better and certain effects do not.
Yeah. In general, something is becoming more powerful or weakened. As I did mention a little bit earlier, it's important to let the players know so that they can make decisions accordingly, rather than have them be surprised by the fact that their class doesn't work a way that they may have expected it to. But if you're making something more powerful, and more impactful, that's something that players are more likely to gravitate toward if that's available. But it's also something that enemy organizations are more likely to gravitate toward. If it's like this is the one kind of magic that exists, then and magic is not particularly common, then you're going to be like, oh gosh, when you're dealing with it. Another thing that this is going to adjust to is like DCs of recall knowledge checks and things like that. If you take something that was like super expected to be common and all over the place in your default setting, and then suddenly you've made it to be this like rare and esoteric thing, it's not going to be something that like everybody knows how this works.
That's
and
right.
vice versa.
I mean, recall knowledge even says if it's uncommon or rare, usually is the hard or very hard DC. So that's absolutely true. All right, it looks like people didn't have any other additional questions about adjusting. So if that's the case, let's say bye to YouTube after this quick episode and then check out the poll afterwards. Bye, YouTube. See you next time. Bye.